What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, shout out to the brother Basketball Facts with a donation to the channel. And he left a note. He says, "The film boys still can't take the truth." No, they can't. And it's sad because their little dream world they've been living in where the media has been catering to them and feeding into their psychosis and their delusions. Well, they're about to get a reality check starting next year, especially when the NBA moves over to NBC and when the league slowly but surely begins to focus on the new stars and they still living in the past. And every conversation that we talk about basketball, they could try to turn it to LeBron, and they'll see. The Lakers have moved on basically from LeBron James. That's Luka's team. And the Mavericks basically said, look, y'all lost Luka, we're going to give y'all a Cooper flag. We're going to give y'all the new Larry Bird. So, that's the thing. It's beginning and the end of the LeBron era, and I love it. But let's talk about something that Walt Frazier said. Now, Walt Frazier, I like Walt Frazier as a player. I think he's very underrated as a point guard. To me, he's a top 10, still to me, a top 10 all-time point guard. At the worst, top 12. He's right in that 9 through 12 trajectory to me, right? Great all-around player, great offensive player, great defensive player. He was an underrated rebounder during his tenure with the New York Knicks, a two-time NBA champion. You can make a case that he should have won Finals MVP in 1970, but it is what it is. But he's always been, to me, a little bit salty when it comes to Michael Jordan, right? I remember reading when Michael Jordan was a rookie, he said Michael Jordan got to realize that he's not a guard. Guards can't carry teams and win championships. And then what did we see? A guy who was a guard who actually led a team to a championship, and I'll bring it up later on. But I don't have the audio in front of me. I couldn't find couldn't find a link to one. But basically what Walt Frazier said in a recent interview was, or a podcast, whatever, was that Michael Jordan doesn't belong in the GOAT conversation. Yeah, I know that's ridiculous to me too. He said Michael Jordan doesn't belong in the GOAT conversation. Now look, I agree with him about who he thinks the GOAT is. He thinks the GOAT is Wilt Chamberlain. I agree with that. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I agree with that. But to sit there and say that Michael Jordan doesn't belong in the GOAT conversation, that's poppycock. Look, so basically he said, look, how is Michael Jordan in the GOAT conversation? He doesn't have the most rings. He doesn't have the most points. That's LeBron James. He says he wasn't the most dominant. He doesn't hold the most records. That's Wilt Chamberlain. Like I say, he doesn't have the most rings. That's Bill Russell. He was quoted Bill as having 13, when Bill had actually 11. And, my thing is this. Wilt has the records, a lot of records, absolutely. And I can't believe I'm making this argument because I got to say this. Michael Jordan could have had all the records if that's what he gave a fuck about. If he only cared about statistical accomplishments, he could have done that. If he had cared to break Bill Russell's record for most rings or what have you, number one, he would never retired. Number two, he could have came back and played well into his 40s and just signed on. He could have did the Robert Horry thing, which he could have done. He could have done the Robert Horry thing. He could have, once he finished with, well, first of all, instead of coming back with the Wizards, he could have resigned as the Wizards basketball president of basketball operations and signed with the Lakers. Then after that, he could have played until his mid-40s and maybe play with the Spurs. And then all of a sudden, his 6 championships become 12. If he had done that. Or he could have never retired, played continuously from 1984 to 2004 or 5, and have the scoring record still. Because if he had played that long, he's going way past 40,000 points. If he had chosen to play that long. All I know is I know what I saw. Y'all know what y'all saw. I saw a player who was a mixture of all those things. He was dominant. He won. And he put up prodigious numbers. When you look at a per game basis, the likes of which we've never seen before or since, even with the rule changes, even with all of the offensive help that these guys have today, they still can't quite touch Michael. And as dominant as my guy Wilt Chamberlain has been in the regular season for his career, Michael was able to do something that only a few select people have been able to do. And that is not only be exceedingly dominant during the regular season, but raise that level of play during the postseason. Michael Jordan averaged 33.4 points per game during the playoffs. 33.4 points per game. That's with really not even shooting a lot of threes. 149 or something in his playoff career. Draymond Green passed him years ago in that department. And Draymond is like, what, 4th in the pecking order offensively for the Warriors? So he did that largely without the advantage of having a three-point shot and without all of the rule changes which have helped offensive players. Also, Jordan dominated on both sides of the basketball. He was a dominant offensive player and a dominant defensive player. We can't say the same thing with Bill Russell. He was a dominant defensive player, but not a dominant offensive player. Now, we could say that about Wilt. Kareem was a dominant offensive player. Kareem was an above-average defender who could be dominant at times. LeBron, we all know that for the most part, he wasn't a dominant defensive player. He could play defense when he wanted to, but he wasn't consistently dominant like Michael Jordan was on that end of the basketball. So you got a guy, Michael Jordan, dominant offensive player, dominant defensive player, winning and clutch, and did something. When you look at the Chicago Bulls organization, he did something that no other star player could say they've done. Magic Johnson was the orchestrator of the band with the Showtime dynasty. But we've also since then seen the Kobe and Shaq little mini dynasty. George Mikan had a dynasty. Jerry West and Wilt and not Elgin, but Jerry West and Wilt won a championship. He had that bubble shit a couple of years ago, right? The Boston Celtics have had other championship years since Bill Russell. Cowens and Havlicek and Bird, McHale and Parrish, and Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett. And we've seen other teams like that. But with the exception of that mid-70s Bulls team, which only peaked to the Western Conference Finals, back then the Bulls were in the Western Conference, the Bulls have been largely a failure since their inception in 1966 outside of the Michael Jordan years. And they're a failure and a disgrace now. They can't even sniff the playoffs. They were a failure when Michael Jordan got there. They were a failure when he left. And with the sole exception of the brief renaissance of the much too brief renaissance of Derrick Rose era, they've been a failure ever since. And he was the first guard in which a championship team was built around. Something that Walt Frazier said couldn't be done when Michael Jordan was drafted back in 1984. So for you to sit there and say, Walt, that he doesn't belong in the conversation, come on, man. Now you're hating, bro. You're hating. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it. Tell me what you guys think.